Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends. When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Beliefs expressed on the following program by the host, guests, or callers are not necessarily the opinions of FantasyXS.com, Media Group Inc. Ownership, management, sponsors, or website. Time for an hour of hardcore hoops with a Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. There's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Let's get to the show basketball fans crave. Let's get inside the paint.
Welcome. Good Wednesday morning to you guys. Clay Ferraro here. Ira Winderman out in Vegas. Hey, Ira, where did you go? Which buffet did you hit up last night?
You know what? I've learned at a certain point, I got to tell you, I've learned at a certain point, you either eat healthy with this lifestyle of being on the road as much as I am, or you wind up in big trouble. I'm the opposite end of the spectrum, Clay. So I'm walking around yesterday. To try to eat healthy in this city has to be one of the hardest things in the world. So I go to a place down here in the hotel and I say, you know what? I got to eat some fruit. I got to eat healthy. I asked the guy, how much is that apple? Now, look, I am cheap and I admit it, but I am not paying $1.75 for an apple. So I walk the strip. I'm literally the guy walking the strip going from CVS and Walmart, rather Walgreens, just to get an apple for $1 and walk down the strip. So I learned a while ago, I always get an In-N-Out burger because we can't get them in South Florida.
Right.
They are freaking fantastic. Got to admit, I'm a White Castle guy. We don't have them in Florida. Stop by there also. And then there's a place, Pin Up Pizza here, which is right outside of Planet Hollywood, which has these huge slices. Like I think a pie is like $80,
okay,
but it's fantastic. And that's sort of my place I always hit up also. So I try to keep it a little simple. But I got to tell you, with 19,000 games a day over at UNLV at the Thomas and Mack Center and Cox Pavilion, Heat practice yesterday, guys talking, Goran Dragic doing things, it's been so busy that basically, like, I know it doesn't sound like it. It almost sounds like I'm sort of a loser or something, but I basically wind up coming here, 1, to work in Vegas, and 2, to annoy people in the hotel rooms on both sides during the Pallet Rack City Miami Heat hour.
So it's just a little different. You're annoying people on both sides there as opposed to annoying, everybody in the media scrum. No, we love our. Hey, so for the show today, I want to talk about where the Heat are. And, we talked a bit about, what they added last week and all that. But where do they fit now in the Eastern Conference? Mm-hmm. So I want to get into that coming up in a little bit. I also want to talk about the piece that you did in the Sun Sentinel about Gabe Vincent. I thought that was really good. And I also think that there's some precedent here for another player that Kyle Lowry has mentored and worked with in the past. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like there could be some correlation there because we know Gabe Vincent is going to work hard, and that could be a really nice relationship. But since you're out there, I want to take advantage of that and the fact that I think you're kind of on the ground floor right now for the NBA. And so what are you hearing right now out there as far as what are the perceptions of what the Heat did, and what are you hearing from the Heat organization about how they feel moving forward?
I'm going to be very honest, Clay. I was expecting to hear a lot more from the Heat organization. Out here, Andy Ellisberg is here, Adam Simon is here. But once, and I know this will be a big subject at one of our 4 segments here in the Pallet Rack City Miami Heat hour, but once the tampering thing started, I'm not going to approach them. Every word is monitored. Honestly, Clay, I'm being very careful not to even text them because now the NBA has the ability to dump telephones, to check text messages. And I got to be honest. There was a point in free agency when I was making a joke to someone involved in the process. This is last Monday, a week ago Monday. So at 6:01 p.m., I go, is it done yet? And then I cut and paste that in my text message 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
So I sent a message, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? As a joke. Well, now all of a sudden the NBA might not find that so funny as they're looking into the timing of Kyle Lowry. So honestly, I've given Andy, I've given Adam their space. I don't figure that this is a point to really bring anything up. And I think you will not hear from Pat Riley, who we have not since free agency, until this whole tampering, gun jumping, whatever you want to call it, thing, the timing thing is taken care of. And I respect that. You've got to watch your words these days because words honestly can get you in trouble.
Can we talk about how ridiculous this is? I mean, there was a report, I think it was Barry Jackson yesterday, that had the report that Kyle Lowry turned down $5 million more from the Pelicans to come to Miami. You really tell me that in the span of 5 minutes after 6 o'clock hit that day, that was when the Pelicans called with this offer and Lowry was like, nah, you know what? I'm good. So you're telling me that the Heat are the only team that had contact, and the Bulls are the only team that had contact with somebody before this whole thing began. I think the frustration is, you go back to last year, and you brought this up last week, by the way, with Bogdanovich and the deal getting nixed to go to Milwaukee. Look, they're not going to take back this deal. But ultimately, if the player gets what he wants, if the team gets what he wants, and the player had the ability to field offers from other teams, whether it happened at 6:01 or not, what difference does this whole thing make?
Well, the difference that it makes, and I knew we'd go on this tangent here, is if you don't have a starting line, and someone from involved with the league told me this, they use the phrase, it becomes the Wild West. And the league doesn't want the Wild West for this reason. 6:01 p.m. On August 2nd last week was the start of free agency negotiations. Everyone knows you start a little bit early. But if you keep moving that back and starting earlier, and earlier, you're doing it during the NBA Finals, the NBA's ultimate showcase. You're doing it during games that actually matter. That's what the league is concerned about, that you're going to keep pushing this, that, well, if they're doing it one day before and they're doing it 2 days before, and you keep backing it up. What I've said all along is, as long as a player is not under contract and is a free agent and the season is over, let them do it anyway. Because, Clay, you know this, and I know that your TV or whatever you're watching was on this at the time. At 6:01 p.m. on August 2nd, ESPN had a show. They're a partner with the NBA. NBA TV had a show. They're a partner with the NBA. They need programming. And as we mentioned last week, no sport in free agency, I believe, has as much of what started in baseball called the hot stove season as it does right now when you're looking at the NBA and what they're doing. So the NBA wants this. They encourage this. They facilitate this. They have their people talking to people ahead of time. So I think the whole gun jumping thing of talking to someone too early is overstated. But, and here's the thing. You might not agree on certain roads you're driving in South Florida that the speed limit should be 30 or the speed limit should be 55. You're driving down the road, you're going, why is it 55 in this section, not that section? But it's the law. And if something is the law, you have to obey the law. So I do think there is a chance of a loss of draft choices here. I do think there will be penalties. I think the fact that the NBA reached out to people and said we're investigating and sent out these letters, and someone did read one of the letters to me, and Kyle Lowry's name is in the letter, that yes, I think there will be penalties. They'll try to curb it. I think it's all a bunch of silliness. But again, you know what, Clay? And again, we're getting so tangential, and I love doing the show with you because of that, because we started A and we wind up at Z. Let me ask you a question. The Miami Heat traded Goran Dragic for Precious Achiuwa for Kyle Lowry. Are you okay with that deal? Those two players going out. Okay. And then let me just interrupt you for a second. What if the Miami Heat traded Goran Dragic, Precious Achiuwa, and a very low first-round pick? I think their pick next year will be in the late 20s. It actually belongs to the Nets. Would you still have been on board with that? Okay, and you know what? Stop there, because you're hemming and hawing, which means you're considering it. So ultimately, and this is my grand point here, and then I'll let you talk, is if the Heat ultimately wind up having to pay a price overall of Goran Dragic, Precious Achiuwa, and a late first-round pick for Kyle Lowry, if that turns out that there was tampering and they rule that the Heat loses their draft choice, I still think you can look at the trade and go, okay, not optimal, but damn, they need Kyle Lowry. They need a bulldog, and Jimmy Butler's turning 32, and they need to win now. I think ultimately that's how we in South Florida might have to look at this deal.
Well, let me tell you why I hemmed and hawed, because some aspiring Andy Ellisbergs on social media yesterday did a great job pointing out the fact that if you put the contracts together like a puzzle piece after they can be aggregated for some of these free agents that were signed, that obviously can't happen for a while, they still fit pretty nicely to potentially bring in somebody on a max deal. And the name that was thrown out a lot is Joel Embiid. So, but in order to do something like that, you would have to have the draft picks to make it happen. So in a vacuum, I would have no problem giving away an extra first-round pick to get somebody like Kyle Lowry here. But if it precludes you down the line from bringing in a potential star, then I think that's where it changes.
But Clay, it might not preclude you for this reason. The Heat have traded their 2023 first-round pick conditionally to the Oklahoma City Thunder as part of their machinations. So that's gone. Yeah. The NBA rule is you cannot trade successive future first-round picks. So the Heat can trade 22, but the league can take away 22.
That makes sense.
So in some ways, you're not going to lose a pick you could have traded anyway. You're just going to wind up, instead of drafting a player, which you would have had to. Now, you could have traded him at the draft, but that doesn't help you at the trading deadline. So that's a June thing when we get back on a normal schedule. So that's also a factor here. Maybe it's a second-round pick. That's what most people are telling me. They think precedent is second-round pick, maybe more of a find than Milwaukee got last year. No offense to Mickey Harrison, but he might be able to find the pocket change there, in the console, between the front seats of his car, and the Heat will be fine. And the irony is, if they take a second-round pick, I don't think the Heat have one until 2027. So when Kyle Lowry is off in retirement, the Heat will lose a second-round pick then.
Last point on this, and I want to move on. Keep this in mind in the context of this investigation. These negotiations did not start. These negotiations didn't even legally start at 6:01 because you go back to February and the trade deadline.
Actually, March was the trading deadline.
I mean, Toronto was allowing the Heat, the Philadelphia 76ers, and I believe also the LA Lakers to talk to Lowry's reps about a contract.
Right, so about his expectations, right.
Right. It's very easy to explain this thing away by saying, look, we may have had some contact, but it was allowed by the Toronto Raptors way back then. And we were talking with the Toronto Raptors about potential compensation way back then. So I just think that specific to I have no clue about the Lonzo Ball deal, but specific to the Heat, you can easily point at this and say these negotiations legally started months ago.
And that's the thing. And decisions come quickly. I remember a couple of years back, a young aspiring sportscaster by the name of Clay Ferraro was working on the west coast of Florida, and he had offers from Miami and Chicago and New York and LA, and they said, make a decision now. Clay, honestly, in business, sometimes you're on it. Either do the deal or we're moving on to the next one. The point guard market was robust this year in free agency. So if a player didn't get the deal he wanted or a team didn't get the deal they wanted, they were going to move next. There was Kyle Lowry. As a matter of fact, I'll give you the perfect example. There was Kyle Lowry. There was Lonzo Ball. There was Spencer Dinwiddie. And then look what happened to a player who didn't act quickly. You know who I'm talking about. And all of a sudden yesterday, Dennis Schroeder winds up taking the taxpayer mid-level, basically a quarter of what he was expecting because he didn't act quickly. So let me ask you, who feels worse? Kyle Lowry, whose team might lose a second-round pick. Lonzo Ball, whose team might lose a draft choice. Or Dennis Schroeder, who turned down like $80 million on an extension with the Lakers, thinking he would get more, winding up making maybe $9 million over the next 2 years in Boston if he picks up his option. So if you didn't act quickly, if you didn't, what's the expression? If you're not cheating, you're not trying. That's basically where we are right now with the Heat and the Bulls and the NBA. And if you want to play by the rules, you get left behind.
So I was fired up about this. This went a lot longer than I was anticipating. So let's hit a break. But I think what you said is going to lead perfectly into what we're going to talk about. Because I think the Dennis Schroeder move to Boston really does help Boston a lot moving forward.
Oh, sure.
And so let's talk about where the Heat stand in the Eastern Conference. I want to go not necessarily team by team, but where they may fit into that picture seeding-wise, but also what it means come playoff time, which is really all anybody cares about anyway. So we're going to get into that and a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
Reach out to Ira and Clay. Drop them an email at insidethepaint@yahoo.com. Chime in on the YouTube chat board. You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines. If you're a Miami sports fan, then there's only one store to go to, and that's Caneswear at Miami Fanwear in Davie. They're your one-stop shop for all your inner Miami CF, Canes, Dolphins, Panthers, and Marlins merchandise. They have hats, t-shirts, game day jerseys, and so much more. Located at 2511 South University Drive in Davie, and open 24/7 online at caneswear.com or innermiamiwear.com. Call them at 954-835-5597. Caneswear, the spot where inner Miami and all Miami sports fans shop.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Welcome back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. Let's get back to the guys that just updated their email from Prodigy to AOL. Here's Ira and Clay.
Oh, yeah, that is what our internet sounds like. So if you see the thing starting to glitch a little bit, then you'll know why. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman out in Vegas at the Summer League as we roll on here on Inside the Paint. Thank you guys for dropping some comments on here. Too Extreme asks, Ira, what do you truly think Kyle Lowry can bring to this Heat team? Do you guys think that he can be that dynamic key player to help this team win big? I'll start. I think he puts you in the conversation, and at this point, that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah, and he just gives you a couple of more elements that Goran Dragic, God bless him, gave you, is that he's a guy who will take the big shot at the big moment, not defer to Jimmy Butler, because he probably thinks he's better than Jimmy Butler because of his confidence, and he can defend the position and keep opposing guards from getting past that first line of defense, honestly, for a team that doesn't have a lot of rim deterrence. So now there's a defender there. Now the Heat are not scrambling like chickens with their heads cut off once a guy gets into the paint, and all of a sudden, like they call it, pulling triggers and next man up, and it becomes this wild scramble. So he gives them an offensive playmaker element more than they've had, but mostly, I can't recall. I'd have to go back a while to think of a defensive point guard who arrives with the kind of reputation that Kyle Lowry has.
And look, there's precedent for this. You don't have to look back too far. Just the biggest difference between the Milwaukee Bucks in 2021 and the Milwaukee Bucks in 2020 was Drew Holiday. And look, I'm not saying Lowry is on the same level as Holiday defensively. I think there's some players in the league that would say Holiday may be the best or one of the best defending guards in the entire league. But man, you watch sometimes even in the finals run for this team, there were times that backcourt defense looked like a sieve. Now you're adding a Lowry. I think that's a big difference. And C. Dola asks, Ira, do you think that this team needs another big?
I don't. I'm not going to overstate Omer Yurtseven, who I believe will be back in action for the Heat today against the Memphis Grizzlies here on Las Vegas, 5 Eastern time on NBA TV. But I think when you look at the power rotation, I think the word big might be overstated because you have Adebayo and Dedmon at center. You have PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris at power forward. And you have Omer Yurtseven as sort of your fifth guy you're developing. It's not a big front court, though. And you're going to, again, have the undersized power forward issue the Heat have had for years. It worked to a degree with Jay Crowder, worked a little less with Trevor Ariza. And because of the rebounding issues, it's still going to have to be more by committee. Kyle Lowry's a very good rebounding guard. That'll help you. But yeah, this is still going to be a smallish Heat team. And ultimately, that was their undoing in the first round against Milwaukee. So maybe Omer Yurtseven can come in and offer them some quality big minutes. He had a huge rebounding game against the Lakers in the Summer League opener. Granted, it's just Summer League, but maybe that helps. They have the position covered. Do they have the position covered tall enough? That's the question.
Yeah, and you go back to the previous year with the Bucks and the Heat in the 2020 playoffs, and that rebounding issue didn't rear its ugly head. And the Bucks weren't significantly different in the front court from that year. Obviously, you had a PJ Tucker and Bobby Portis played. Although Bobby Portis didn't play much in that playoff series. So I feel like you look at the difference between the 2 years, and I'm not as worried about that because then you make the other team defend you. And I think that's something that the Heat did in the finals against the Lakers 2020 was they slowly figured out how to play Dwight Howard off the floor. But now you're getting better in the backcourt, and so I think that makes a big difference. So this transitions us into what I really wanted to talk about for most of the show today, which was with what the Heat have done. And then you canvass the rest of the Eastern Conference. Where are the Heat as it stands? And we're talking regular season right now because I think everybody knows the playoffs is a different animal. But regular season, let's start right at the top. Does this put the Heat in that top two category with Milwaukee and Brooklyn?
Well, let's break it down by those two teams. You started, we talked about this last week also. You're not going to outscore the Brooklyn Nets. You're not going to outscore Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. I think they'll probably have two of the top 5 scorers in the NBA this season. And if Kyrie's motivated, he could be up there. So I think you take the second best approach. Can you out-defend them? And like I said last week, at least now you can try PJ Tucker on Kevin Durant. You can try Jimmy Butler on James Harden. You can wind up trying Kyle Lowry against Kyrie Irving and give yourself a defensive chance. I still don't think they're better. I think the NBA is a league that has always had their sort of super elite team that everyone's chasing, the big threes. And obviously everyone was chasing the Heat those 4 years. They didn't win the title every year, but they were in chase mode. The Heat are still very much in chase mode of the Brooklyn Nets. Again, regular season's different. Brooklyn's not motivated necessarily. Kyrie Irving's going to go off on his 20-game walkabout where you don't know where he is, but he'll be back at the moments of truth. So I don't think they're there with him. Milwaukee's a little bit more interesting. They're not going to outscore you to that degree. Again, you have the defense. PJ Tucker on Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jimmy Butler on Chris Middleton. You have Kyle Lowry being able to guard Drew Holiday. You're a little better in that matchup there. I think the playoffs this year was almost an anomaly. It was a COVID season. The Heat just never truly had their footing in that series. Jimmy Butler, I think, put a little too much pressure on him, didn't have a running mate. I think the Heat could be very competitive right there with Milwaukee. The thing is, Clay, I don't think the Heat will finish first or second in the conference, which means they will play one of those two teams, if they advance, in the Eastern Conference semifinals and another one in the Eastern Conference finals. As Bobby Marks said, the ESPN analyst and former Nets executive, on one of his Instagram posts, he believes the East is stronger than the West right now. Not something we've said a lot in recent years, and I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah, Mark Stein said the same thing, and I agree with that, especially when you're talking top to bottom. I think when you get down towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference, for the longest time, it felt like it was going to be a walkover. If you were playing your Orlandos of the world, or even Chicago before they got Vucevic, or Washington last year, even though they got better, I think it was pretty clear that they weren't quite there yet. But now you talk about those sorts of teams. But I want to stay at the top because these are the tops of teams that we're going to talk about with the Heat competing against. And you're right. They're not as good as those two teams. And obviously Milwaukee's a little bit different. They're not as good as those two teams on a night in, night out basis. But this is kind of the context that I'm going to frame this entire conversation in.
Sure.
Nobody can tell me that this Heat team is currently constructed cannot put together a playoff series in a vacuum to beat any team in the Eastern Conference. So to me, it's if you play against a Brooklyn team, you talk about out-defending them. If you get into a world where PJ Tucker makes Kevin Durant's life difficult and you can find a way to guard James Harden and Kyrie Irving, you can extend that team to a 6th, 7th game and potentially win that. you can go up against a Milwaukee Bucks team in the playoffs. And if somebody gets injured on either one of those teams, like this is why you don't tank. If you have a team that is capable of beating those teams, put yourself in the position to do that. And I think you could say that's what Milwaukee did last year, where it would have been really, really easy for a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference to potentially punt because of what happens with. But you never know when James Harden's going to pull a hamstring. Sure. You never know when Kyrie Irving's going to have an ankle injury. So the context of this conversation, let's make sure to say at the outset, I think this Heat team can make a run to the NBA Finals and win a championship. That doesn't mean that I think they're better.
And just to interject another thing that I didn't point out before, I think the Heat were exhausted last year also. I think the bubble season and all that. So here's two factors. I like that Jimmy didn't go to the Olympics, that he gave himself some time off and he regrouped. I'm a little bit concerned, spoke to him the other day out here in Vegas about Bam Adebayo. We're just talking, Clay, 6 weeks till camp starts again. You know, the NBA has been relentless. COVID has been relentless also, so I understand. But as they try to move back to their typical schedule now, by not deferring the start of the season again, by starting camp in late September, all of a sudden for those Olympic players, it'll be interesting to see Milwaukee and what happens to them, you know, now that Holiday and Middleton are back and Booker is back with Phoenix. And Bam also, who played a very significant role out there at the Tokyo Games. He started every game out there. I hope he gets his rest also. That's going to be a factor also. This is basically a 3-year fatigue battle in the NBA. But there's a lot more rest for the Heat this offseason than there was last offseason.
It's not a coincidence that the 4 conference finalists from last year did not make it back this year. Not a coincidence that those 4 teams, Boston, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Nuggets actually did a pretty good job considering how many injuries that they had, especially in the backcourt, and the Heat didn't make it back this year. So let's use that to transition to the next team that I think is the closest competitor to those top 2 in addition to the Heat, and that's Boston. I'm not buying into Philly right now. I think the issue with Ben Simmons sounds like a disaster. It sounds to me like he's not even returning their phone calls. I mean, at some point, you have to figure that situation out before you can even talk. So let's talk about Boston and the move that they made yesterday, adding Dennis Schroeder, who I think a lot of Heat fans were hoping they could potentially get on that mid-level. All of a sudden, he goes to Boston at $6.2 million on a prove-it deal. To me, Ira, that adds an element to that Boston team where, look, I think we knew they were talented, and especially if Jaylen Brown is healthy, then they're going to be a problem. Now, I think you start to talk about them as potentially making a push in that next tier with the Heat.
Well, when they lost Kemba Walker, there was questions about point guard. They were going to move Marcus Smart back there. I think Dennis Schroeder helps, but I always worry about a player who feels he got a raw deal, that he might be playing more for himself than his team because he wants to get his good deal the year after, maybe playing for his numbers, maybe more than playing for the playoffs. It's interesting. Boston is such a remix. Al Horford's back in the mix. I think a lot of people forget about that. That changes the dynamic to a degree also. So I just wonder how much they could pull it together under a rookie coach. Ime Udoka is there. That's also a factor. It's hard to jump right into the mix. You know, we've seen it with others. Look, even Steve Nash came up short of the conference finals last year. You have to work your way through this. So I think Boston is interesting. I still think Boston is a bunch of pieces that still have to show me they can fit together. And I also wonder, at the first sign of adversity, after what's happened to the Celtics the last 2 seasons, does Jason Tatum go, man, we need more than this. We should have blown it up? Does Jaylen Brown going, hey, I love Jason Tatum as a friend, but this partnership doesn't work. We're just too similar. So yes, I think Boston is a team on paper. When you look at the pieces, when you look at Al Horford and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart and Dennis Schroeder and what they have there, they have a lot of pieces. But to me, it's sort of like Philadelphia before the whole Ben Simmons doesn't shoot a layup and passes the ball away for a dunk, is you still have to show you can play together. I have a little more faith, cohesiveness with the Heat right now, even though they're a new mix because of the culture, than maybe I do in Boston or Philadelphia.
The Ben Simmons situation, man, I just feel like, okay, Tyrese Maxey played really, really well in stretches last year. If you want to try to put the ball in his, get what you can for Ben Simmons. This is not a time to play. So anyway, that's why I'm kind of removing them from the conversation for the moment. Not saying that they're not talented. And
Don't sell short Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris. Everyone sells short Tobias Harris. He's a really good player. He's an all-star level player. He can be a finisher if you need him at the end. Seth Curry had a very good year last year. Bringing back Danny Green is important. They have good pieces. They just seem to be a mess. It's just sort of who they are. They've never recovered sort of from the process.
I agree. Okay, so the team in the division that we even talked about, the division champs last year that took the division from Miami, and that's the Atlanta Hawks. And I said this last week that I have a feeling that my feeling on that team is I think they're better constructed moving forward than I think they're given credit for. I think a lot of people on the outside feel like this is a team that, okay, they kind of took advantage of some situations. They got into the conference finals last year. But I feel like the way this team is built, they're going to be a handful. With that said, I feel like the Heat position themselves to better defend and beat a Hawks team this year than they were last year. So again, when you're talking tiers here, I think, and this is my opinion, I think you've got Brooklyn and Milwaukee at the top. I think you've got Miami and Boston in that next tier. And you can argue Philly. I've got my feelings on them. But I would put Atlanta right there, kind of pushing that next tier and potentially a scary team this season.
Took care of John Collins, which was important. John Collins made him blink, and they did. Instead of getting $90 million, he got $125 million by waiting for the end of the season. Obviously, Trae Young is just one of these phenomenons. Steph Curry-like in that he can just get where he wants, when he wants, create unbelievable Lillard-like long-distance shots. Their veterans stepped in, Bogdanovich when he was healthy, Gallinari when he was healthy. So they have a nice mix. They have, some injury situations also going into the season. Their young center last year, the rookie, is going to be out for the first half of the season. They're a team that I still wonder if that last season wasn't the one-off. I think last season was a potential because, again, COVID, teams coming together, the compacted schedule. You saw some teams shoot to the top you didn't expect. You saw Phoenix. You saw the Utah Jazz during the regular season. You saw the Hawks. Even the Knicks, I think, might have overachieved. I always say with teams like that, back it up. Do it again. And you know what, Clay? And outsiders will say the same thing about the Heat in the bubble in 2020. Back it up. That's what the Heat have to do this year. So there are teams that are really good, the Nets and the Bucks, and they've been, at the top as it was already. I think Atlanta, I need to see them back it up. Remember the Mike Budenholzer Hawks of about 4 or 5 years ago, number one in the conference. They had like 4 All-Stars. Jeff Teague was an All-Star, and Horford was an All-Star, and their entire lineup was an All-Star. And they had that one season and they disappeared. So I think for Atlanta, you have to back it up before I truly believe you. I do agree. They're in that next tier. I'm not even so sure they're tier 2 as much as maybe tier 3 in the Eastern Conference.
And I seem to be, I think I'm a little higher on them than you are. And I think you're a little higher on Philly and their talent and ability for that to overcome than I am. And so but I think we're largely on the same page there. Do you think that Chicago has done enough to put themselves in that conversation where they could potentially push a team like an Atlanta, like a Miami, to get into that tier 2 status?
I think Chicago's a team. I always refer to teams like this. They're a team that has a lot of stuff, but I need to see how that stuff comes together. I mean, you have Zach LaVine, who's obviously playing well, had some real moments in the Olympics and leading up to the Olympics. You have Lonzo now, who's coming over there. You have obviously the trade for Vucevic last season. So you have a whole bunch of pieces that can come together. I like Patrick Williams a lot, what he did as a rookie out of Florida State. But I need to see that coalesce to a degree. That's hard to do. It's hard to bring in that disparate kind of pieces. What kind of team are they? Is Vucevic going to be out running with Lonzo Ball? Is Lonzo going to push and play a 2-man game with Zach LaVine? I need to see a little more of how that comes together. Billy Donovan's got to sort of find his foothold there in Chicago. I would put it this way. I think Chicago is the kind of team that will produce a lot of impressive regular season victories, that there's individuals there, that Lonzo or Zach LaVine, guys who can have their games that'll single-handedly beat you. But I'm not so sure I'm sold on them as a team necessarily. And here's the deal. Just to remind people again, top 6 directly to the playoffs. Next 2 in the play-in round.
Right.
So I think Chicago at least will be a play-in team. Then again, everyone's a play-in team. You're going to have basically 10 out of 15 teams in each conference making some sort of playoffs. But that's a good first step for Chicago. And the one thing about Chicago, when they traded those first-round picks for Vucevic, they said they were living in the moment. So now's their moment.
So I think we're on largely the same page with this. Your tiers are Brooklyn, Milwaukee at the top, and then right. I think you can make the case that the Heat are at the very top of tier 2. So, but
or their own tier, maybe their own tier, tier 2. Yeah,
I have zero belief in the New York Knicks, none whatsoever. I think
they fade back. Yeah,
I agree, and I feel like it's one of those. You give them a ton of credit, and Tom Thibodeau a ton of credit for what he did there, and kind of letting them play above their heads. But I thought the playoffs were really telling in what they didn't belong on the court with Atlanta, and I think that's what happens in the playoffs when teams care more. And, you can get through being the team that's trying the hardest and working the hardest during the regular season. Mm-hmm. But once you get to the playoffs, talent takes over. And you've also got more time in between games. So, that element of figuring things out and being the team that's angrier. Look, Evan Fournier is nice. Kemba Walker is nice. And yet at the same time, I don't think it changes who they are moving forward. So
look, their biggest offseason acquisition was Evan Fournier. You could say Kemba Walker, but Evan Fournier has always been a guy who's produced statistics, and his team has never really gone anywhere, whether it's Orlando, last season in Boston. So, basically his top play has been international competition and what he's done with the French national team. Kemba, I still, in my mind's eye, see Kemba as the great Kemba Walker, as UConn Kemba Walker, as Heat killer in Charlotte Kemba Walker, but maybe I need to give up on that a little bit because it's been a while. And I remember what he looked like in that series against the Heat in 2020. He had some moments, but not enough moments. Again, that's a team of pieces. Clay, I think a lot of these teams we've spoken about, Boston, Miami, Chicago, New York, have so many new pieces. Which teams come together and coalesce, and which teams realize we got a lot of pieces that don't come together. So I go to the next level. I trust Eric Spoelstra there. He's brought a lot of divergent type teams together. They either have had defensive teams, they either have had offensive teams. I think he's really good at that. I know Tom Thibodeau is a great coach, but he's had places where he couldn't get the pieces to work. At the end in Chicago, in Minnesota. So I just look at Tom Thibodeau and I'm wondering, how is he going to do with this mix? I need to see the Tom Thibodeau mixtape to see if he could pull this off in New York. And I think even Atlanta. Nate McMillan stepped in last season. You get the boost of the interim coach. Remember that coaching change. It happened in Miami. That's true. He destroyed him one game. They played consecutive games. Atlanta comes back. Their absolute takeoff point was that victory at what was then American Airlines Arena. So I think it's going to be a matter of who coalesces in the East and who doesn't. And I think coaching will play a large part of that. You got a rookie coach there in Boston. That's a factor. Will Billy Donovan find his footing in Chicago?
So let's close out the show on that coming up next. How do the Heat coalesce? How do they come together and be that team? Because we've talked about, this is a Miami show. We talked enough about the other teams.
Right.
I want to talk about how the Heat come together and coalesce. And also somebody who I think isn't being talked about enough, unless you read Ira's column in the Sun Sentinel, and what kind of role he can play. Let's talk about that and a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint. What have we learned so far today? We've learned that I hate the tampering rule. I hate that the NBA is going after the Heat and Bulls. We've learned that Ira hates paying $1.75 for an apple.
For a stinking apple, for a stinking piece of fruit. I'm going to Walgreens and giving them $1, and I'm not happy with that. I miss my Trader Joe's. What I've learned also is the unveiling of the coffee cups during the show, which at 7 a.m. here in
That's
Vegas
right.
I need. Yeah, so I sort of feel like, we're doing the Kelly show there in the morning. So, a little relaxed atmosphere here as the people in the room next door wonder, what the hell is going on in there?
They can feel the reverberations, right? Okay, so we've talked about that, the tampering stuff. We talked about where the Heat fit in the Eastern Conference. Part of that, as you said, is which teams are going to coalesce and come together, which teams are going to be able to gel, because, beyond Milwaukee and Brooklyn, you're really counting on some of these other teams integrating some important pieces. With the Heat, it's Kyle Lowry. With the Knicks, it's Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Chicago, adding pretty much So I think it's really important to point out that the Heat have done this before. Where does somebody like Victor Oladipo and him coming back fit into all of that?
Well, right now he doesn't, because he's not coming back anytime soon after his May quadricep surgery. But it's interesting, Clay. Just when we were finishing last Wednesday's show on the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, Victor Oladipo signing became official, and it was a 1-year minimum make good type of deal, sort of similar, more like Dennis Schroeder, almost expecting more, realizing that's where the market is. It's almost two different Heat teams with Victor Oladipo. If you know Victor Oladipo is going to be here, you established a different type of rotation. If you don't know if that's the case, you basically put him to the side and say, when Victor comes back, we'll decide plan B of what this team is going to be. If Victor Oladipo is in the playoff rotation, oh my God, defensively at the end of games, when you can sick out Bam Adebayo and PJ Tucker and Victor Oladipo and Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry, you can basically stop anyone, or at least try to stop anyone and have as good a shot as anyone. If Victor Oladipo comes around, to me, that changes everything about this Heat season. If he's anything like his best days in Houston and, of course, his best days in Indiana, but you can't make that assumption. When a guy who's already had this injury, had surgery for it, did not come back 100%, had to have it again. They said they always, again, you and I are the same way. We get these press releases. So-and-so underwent successful surgery, and the ongoing joke in our business is you want the one underwent surgery that went horribly wrong, and the so-and-so team regret this moment, So we have to wait and see. Victor Oladipo can slot in, as I wrote about in the Sun Sentinel today, that he don't have a backup point guard right now. He might be able to be that. But again, we're talking January, February, I really think, if even that. He's going to be smart. Clay, when you're not rushing back for big money and you're only coming back for the minimum, you're going to prioritize your health. So it's going to be, and hopefully we get back to practice this year, and you know how it's going to set up. We're going to go upstairs to the gym at FTX Arena. We're going to ask Eric Spoelstra, where does Victor Oladipo stand? And Eric Spoelstra is going to tell us, we're worried about the players who are here right now. We're not worried about
that.
Yes, and that's going to be it. There is no update. And so that's the thing. It's a waiting game. But yes, the Heat will be a different team. And it goes back to what we spoke about in the last segment. Can you coalesce then as a team with a player like that?
So, and I think how this is going to play out is because he wants to come back right in January or February. The Heat are basically like, nah, you know what? Chill. Like, take your time, come back. Because I think what you just said is the most important point. They don't care about the regular season. They don't care if he comes back. Come back for like a week before the end of the regular season. Work in practice, get used to your guys, rehab that, and get as close to good as you can. Because, you mentioned his days in Indiana. Look, man, I thought you could see a difference in the energy, the defense, just during his time here.
Yes,
when he
that
was
week,
on the
4
defensive
games.
end of the floor.
Yeah.
So, like, if you can get to that point with him, who cares if he plays a single minute during the regular season?
I care. No, Clay, I care. I think you need a little continuity. So I would look at it this way. The trading deadline is going to revert to a more normal schedule this year, about February 23rd or so. If you can get him at least in practice by then and working with your players,
Fair.
You know what, Clay?
Fair.
It's the same as when you acquire a player at the trading deadline. The Heat have gotten players at trading deadlines, be it Goran Dragic or going back to the day Tim Hardaway. They've worked them in effectively to help them the second half of the season. Hardaway, obviously, into the playoffs. So I think if you get a player back in that time frame, it's no different than acquiring a player in a trade.
That's
and the
fair.
Heat has never been shy about doing that and making those kind of moves. So I think as long as Victor Oladipo starts working, say, in January or early February, and after that long break, and maybe during that break, you can sort of work him back in a little bit more, I think that helps because you want to know your identity. You want to know who you are. Some people might even say there were still too many moving parts last season when you brought in Ariza and you brought in Dedmon and you were changing things a little bit. So I think that would help. You need him a little bit sooner. And also, he needs to show something of significant sample size in order to get his contract.
Absolutely.
Remember, the Heat have his bird rights. So as crazy as it sounds, he's gone from a contract in the 20 millions to a contract to 2.5 million, but he can go right back to a contract of 30 million if he proves he's worth that, because the Heat with his bird rights can pay him up to the maximum a year from now. So this is a partnership where the Heat want to make it work. They want to go to Mickey Arrison's wallet. Victor Oladipo has to show a sample size of something significant and tangible to make that happen.
So we talked about kind of setting your team up to compete against the best. Man, there is not a team that would be better equipped to handle a healthy Brooklyn Big Three. If you were able to roll out there defensively, Victor Oladipo, Kyle Lowry, either Tucker or Morris, probably Tucker since he had some experience going up against Durant last year, and then obviously Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. I mean, those are the types of lineups that if you get into a playoff series, being able to mix and match there, you're right. That can be the game changer. I get what you're saying on coalescing and making sure that you build some of that continuity. But bottom line is, yeah, you're right. He really would change kind of the complexion.
But and Clay, let's also understand today's modern NBA. It's still geared and tilted, slanted toward the offense. It's like the NFL passing game. They just have the built-in advantage. So the bottom line is we can talk all we want that the Heat can put out a defensive 5 against the Nets offensive 5. But the offensive 5 these days always wins. I mean, let's be honest. You still would prefer, if you were Clay Ferraro and you had money on the game and it was an even betting line, you would go with the Nets. That's That's the proven scoring right there. You might also go with the Bucks. Defense is nice if the rules were that way. When it was the old Pat Riley with the Knicks, hand checking and you hand fight them, and the old, what people used to say, the old saw that Pat Riley would have his players foul so often, even the referees would go after a while, I can't keep blowing my whistle. But the game has changed, and they will keep blowing their whistle right now. So it still favors the offense. So the offensive moments of truth, that's where I think Victor Oladipo also helps. He's a shot creator. You need shot creators. He can do that. He can get, the phrase everyone's using now, he can get downhill. Kyle Lowry can get downhill. Jimmy Butler can get downhill. So if you have another one of those, it sets up the Duncan Robinson. It sets up on the sort of duck in on a Bam Adebayo. But you need those, scoring creators also. That's where Victor Oladipo also helps.
Well, you're right. To your point about would you put your money on Brooklyn? Yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. I would have put my money, if I were a betting man, I would have put my money on the Boston Celtics to beat the Heat in the finals last year. I would have put money on the Bucks to beat the Heat in the conference semifinal. So what I've kind of learned with this team is that you don't dismiss the ability in the playoffs to put things together and beat teams that on paper, and especially when it comes to the boys out there in Vegas where you are, to make a big difference. And so, but that's, I want to discuss somebody that you talked about in the Sun Sentinel this morning, and you mentioned Victor Oladipo potentially being that backup. But the guy that I don't think is getting enough credit, I'm glad you did the piece on, is Gabe Vincent. And I want to frame this in the context of, he's not the same player. He's not even, I don't even know if you would say a similar player in how he approaches the game as the guy I'm about to talk about. But there is precedent for somebody being mentored by Kyle Lowry and turning into a really, really good backcourt player.
I'm not so sure where you're going. I want you to go. So tread lightly here, my good friend Clay.
Fred VanVleet.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he's not going to be on that level. I'm not saying he's going there. But when you talk about somebody, there is precedent. Look at Fred VanVleet's first couple of years in the league, in particular his first year. No, I love Fred VanVleet at Wichita State. I loved watching him in the NCAA tournament. I thought he was going to be a great role player in the NBA. I never envisioned him getting to this level. And I think that you have to point at having a mentor like a Kyle Lowry. And again, not the same type of player. Right. But as far as having somebody who is a mentor at the point guard position, and VanVleet played off the ball a bit as well, but having the ability to go to a Kyle Lowry and learn, I think that you can look at the potential growth for Gabe Vincent. Because part of getting better as a team isn't just adding pieces. It's hoping the guys in your building get better. I think you couldn't have asked for a better guy for Gabe Vincent to learn from than Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I want to give context to the story I wrote in the Sun Sentinel. Basically what I wrote was this, is whether you agree with the quality or pedigree of the signings and the moves that the Heat made in the offseason, they basically filled their positional boxes. So at center, you have Dedmon and Bam Adebayo, check mark. At power forward, you have PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris. Say what you want about them, but you have the position covered. Check mark. On the wing, since basically small forward, shooting guard are the same, you have Jimmy Butler, you have Duncan Robinson, you have Tyler Hero, potentially Victor Oladipo. But then, and again, I write about this every year, probably hates it, but you look at point guard. Before, they just had Goran Dragic. Now, when you look at point guard, right now, they not only do they don't have Goran Dragic anymore, they have Kyle Lowry, and they don't have anyone else in there. So, Clay, my point as we wait for you to reconnect here is, I think when you look at the Heat right now and you look at point guard and the way their situation is set up, there's no plan B there. That I know that he can say, hey, we're going to go to Jimmy Butler and let him ball handle. But that adds more responsibility to him having to go 94 feet against pressure. I know you could say, okay, we're going to go to Bam Adebayo and let him operate off the elbow with his passing. And that's all well and good also. But the problem is that takes him a little bit sort of out of the mix as a center when Bam Adebayo is facilitating. So I'd rather not have Jimmy Butler have to advance the ball. I'd rather not have Bam Adebayo have to always facilitate. But when Kyle Lowry goes out of the game, or more importantly, when Kyle Lowry at 35 years old misses 10 games or so, what's going to be the answer? I think Gabe Vincent can do that, but it was really interesting. And I spoke to Gabe about this yesterday at practice here at UNLV. When they were broadcasting the Olympic Games, one of the analysts for the Nigeria game said, Gabe Vincent starts all these games at point guard for Nigeria, but then they realize they need his shooting and they move him off the ball. So can he be the same player if he is playing point guard? Can he be the shooter who basically established his NBA reputation by coming in and making shots in the G League with Stockton Kings and then with the Sioux Falls Skyforce? I like Gabe Vincent. I think he could be your third point guard, but I'd like to see one more. Even I'm going to throw a name out there I think that he'd have looked at, like even a Jeff Teague. Just open in case of emergency. I'm not saying I love the player. I'm not saying you're going anywhere in the playoffs with him as a starter, maybe even a rotation player. But, when you look at Kyle Lowry, Clay, I think you'd agree. Kyle's probably going to miss at least 10 games. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a smart play, by the way. I think you want to have these guys missing some games.
So let me ask you this question. And I ran this by the Heat broadcasters were there. I was speaking with Anthony Chang of the Miami Herald and I asked them this question. I'll ask it to you now. Kyle Lowry is going to be out 3 to 5 games with a strained hamstring, let's say. Who are you starting in his place?
I think it would have to be Vincent at this point.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because some people say Vincent, some people say Tyler Hero. Remember, Tyler Hero was the starting point guard for a while for the Heat, and especially when Dragic was out, they didn't have another point guard played there. I feel that took away from his game.
I agree.
I feel he was so concerned being a playmaker. He was not the boy wonder he was when he arrived in his rookie season out of Kentucky, 2019-2020. And also, Clay, and you know this, a lot of times when a Heat player is out, Eric Spoelstra does not move the next man up.
Absolutely.
He likes to keep the continuity of his rotation. So I think you're going to wind up in the situation where when Kyle Lowry does miss this time, who starts? Right now it's Gabe Vincent. You know what? For 1 game, 2 games, spot here or there, no issue with that. But I think if Kyle Lowry is going to be out for 8 to 10 games because of a hamstring or a groin or something like that, then I think I'd rather have an NBA proven veteran who can step in there, whether it's a Jeff Teague or someone like that, just for that moment. Then you get back to normalcy.
I can see that. I think the big problem with trying to put Hero out there last year, I think would be something that would be alleviated with the Gabe Vincent. And why I like him in that role is he's a much, much better defender. And so I think that part of the big problem that you had last year was when you tried to play guys at that point guard spot, yeah, maybe they could get, even if Tyler Hero were playing on the offensive end of the floor and doing what he needed to do as a point guard, you would see the drop off on the other end of the floor.
Right.
And so to me, that's where I think Gabe Vincent could really fit in well with this.
And I want to get to one last name here as we close out the show, because it's the one piece of bookkeeping the Heat haven't gotten around to if they're not signing another point guard. And you probably know where I'm going with this. Clay Ferraro, you just been named general manager of the Miami Heat. Andy Ellisberg has moved on to a job in the league office. Congratulations, Andy. You have one more player to sign. Udonis Haslem is not signed yet. The expectation he's coming back. This roster can afford one more player under the luxury tax for the moment. Do you expect to see in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the start of the season, an announcement somewhere at a employee operator-owned Subway store that Udonis Haslem is coming back, number one, and number two, you're general manager of the Heat, so you're at a higher pay grade. Is that the move that should be made with the Heat's last roster spot? And I like how we do this with seconds left in the show.
Yes. Can we stop with this? Can we stop? It's the 14th guy on the roster. It's Udonis Haslem. Yes. You sign him.
I think it's interesting because, like you said, there were questions about power forward. There are questions about point guard. They have one roster spot at the veteran minimum left to get them to just below the tax line. Yes, I think it's going to happen. I think at some point, whether it's next week's show, Pallet, Rack City, Inside the Heat, Inside the Paint, or down the road, I think we're going to be talking about Udonis Haslem coming back. And it'll just be interesting because I'll have to decide whether I want that toasted and with cheese or not.
2 things you can count on. UD coming back. Big O taking the reins after this. Thanks for hanging out on Inside the Paint. Big O show rolls on after this.
You've been listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro, exclusively on the Big O Radio Show. Search Big O Radio Show on most platforms. Subscribe and smash the like button to support Inside the Paint. If you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business, there's only one choice: Pallet Rack City. When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547.